Dr. David Cohen works with leaders, helping them understand what is and what is not necessary to build an active and positive organization. He helps leaders step into life's challenges, inspiring them to create a sustained approach through a values-based focus, resulting in better business results. Dr. Cohen had the privilege of partnering with firms across 5 continents and all business sectors. Additionally, he has worked with governments from the local to the federal levels and not-for-profits. Dr. Cohen is a keynote speaker, educator, disruptor, facilitator, team builder, and executive coach. Along with us is also Mr. Gil Cohen, who has worked with leadership teams from numerous industries, gaining insights into their different styles. His work has spanned a variety of topics, among others, employee experience, talent management, values definition, and leadership development. The work that Mr. Cohen has completed has had a focus on aligning human and organizational needs. This enhances the ability of the organization and its people to achieve their individual and common goals. Mr. Cohen has run workshops and conference sessions throughout North America, where his focus is working with smaller to medium-sized groups. Our esteemed speakers will discuss how to strengthen our employee experience through COVID-19 and beyond. The impact of COVID-19 on our organizations and employees is dramatic and unprecedented. What are the implications on this pandemic on employees, and how can organizations successfully navigate through the crisis and prepare for tomorrow? The sustainability of businesses will depend on the decisions that leaders make now. One of the most impactful choices is the design of the experiences their people live through. With us are Dr. David S. Cohen and Mr. Gil Cohen to further elaborate on this trending topic, shedding light on practical examples drawn from their experiences. Sirs, thank you for accepting OEV's and CYHRMA's invitation. We redirect the focus from us in Cyprus to you in Canada.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We're looking forward to sharing our thoughts with you, provoking hopefully some ideas, challenging maybe some existing ideas, and moving forward. I was hoping, of course, before this all started, to be in Cyprus at the conference next week. I was actually looking forward to that. Considering, however, that the temperature there is 45 degrees, I am better off here in Toronto, where it's hit a high today of 18 with no humidity, and it's probably the warmest day it's been here in about 3 or 4 months. So with that said, let me, in the time that remains, let me talk to you just as a brief introduction, then I'll turn it over to Gil. Perhaps we can also put up some of the questions. There are 5 questions that we have formulated to help us get an understanding of the audience a little bit. So if you can put up those questions while I'm doing the introduction, that'd be appreciated. One of the things that we know is that employee experience, a lot of people take the time and focus on employee engagement, but employee engagement is no more than a reflection of the employee experience. And employee engagement is not going to be sustained through good food and, you know, different parties, et cetera, et cetera. That's not the foundation for employee engagement. The foundation for creating an engaged employee group is to have a positive employee experience. What does that mean? It means what does that individual think about as a person after they leave work, after they've done their day's work, they go home, what are they going to remember? They're probably going to remember, first and foremost, how they were treated at work and how they feel. So it is the interaction between leadership and their direct reports that will lead to a stronger employee experience. That employee experience will be reflected in the customer experience, because if you have happy employees, they're going to pass on the way they were treated to their customers. So it's very important that everyone focus on this concept of employee experience first and foremost. And one of the things that we want to do is to talk to you about why. Why is this important? So Gil, perhaps you could take it and take us through the whys of the importance of employee experience and what is the impact on the wellness of employees, because that really relates to the answer number one that they gave in the previous set of questions, which is how do we make sure that our employees are supported as people? Because if we can treat people like people, they usually come around and return the favor. Gil, take it away.
So why employee experience? As a newer concept that's only come out in the last few years and only really been discussed in the last few years, whenever I bring the idea to leaders, I'm always asked the same question: why employee experience? And so really, to get at the heart of that, I like to go through an exercise which is around the 5 whys. So starting with, why does employee experience matter? So the reason ultimately that employee experience matters is that it impacts the wellness of the employee population. That is the first answer to why, because the way we experience work, and I'll get more into detail on how that happens in a moment, but the way we experience work impacts our human wellness. Our wellness impacts ultimately our mental and our physical health. So then to take it a little bit deeper, why does human wellness matter? Well, there's 2 main answers for that question. One is the human answer, which is quality of life. If our wellness factors are served, if our wellness is served and our mental and physical health are served, we have a better quality of life. We're able to sleep better at night. We're able to have better relationships with our family members. We're better able to focus outside of work hours, as well as focus more inside work hours. As well, there are better physical health outcomes. So that's the first side to it. But then there's also the business side to it of, why does human wellness matter from a business perspective? Well, ultimately, human wellness matters for a business perspective because it drives our behaviors. So I want everyone to think for a second about the worst employee experience you've had. Just the absolutely most demotivating experience in workplace that you've been. And think about, what were your behaviors, what was your productivity level? And then compare that to the best employee experience you have. I'm hoping it's the one you're having right now at the organization you're with, but you never know. What is the comparison between the best experience you have and the worst experience? And then ultimately, how did that change your performance levels? And ultimately, why do behaviors matter? Because they're what drive organizational outcomes. They're the differentiator between a successful sale, a successful project, and one that failed, based on the way people perform. So, the classic 5 whys, we don't even need to get through 5 whole whys to understand that employee experience is integral to both human quality of life and organizational outcomes. But I want to rewind a bit and talk back about that first why around human wellness. Because while most people think about our mental and physical health, we're not aware that there are actually 8 factors of wellness that drive that health. And so on the next slide, I can take you through those 8 factors of wellness. So if you see, there are 4 on top, which are the visible factors, those that would be accessible to those outside of an individual. And then the 4 on bottom are the internal factors. So I'll start with the top ones, the ones that would be visible from an external observer. So starting with financial wellness. Financial wellness is essentially how much we have relative to our debt, our overall wealth, our overall growth relative to our needs. The organization impacts this in more than one way. So the obvious way that everyone thinks about is compensation. Because what is our compensation drives our overall financial well-being. But there are other factors involved too. One of the factors is actually the overall cost of working for an organization. Here in Toronto, the cost of commuting and the cost of driving is extremely high. So somebody working in an office versus working from home, there will be a significant cost to working in an office. Another major factor right now around financial wellness, and it is really, really important as we navigate through this crisis, is job stability. Because of the increasing unemployment and the negative impact on our economies, more and more people have job instability, which ultimately impacts their decisions. They go into self-protection mode, and they don't necessarily make the best decisions or have the best behaviors for the organization. Next over is environmental wellness. That is, what is our relationship with our immediate environment? So a lot of money is put into what the design of an office is like, ensuring that the temperatures are correct, ensuring that the lighting is correct, et cetera, et cetera. Right now, many people are working from home and they haven't necessarily been able to put that thought. So it's important to start to look at what is the environmental wellness of people as they navigate through this crisis. Because the amount of money and effort that's been put in under normal times isn't necessarily there. Physical wellness is also an area that has been dramatically impacted by COVID. Physical wellness is about our relationship with our bodies and the decisions we make and the habits we have and the impact they have on our physical health. So one example, a major example of this is the ergonomics we have. It's ultimately extremely important to have a chair that's lined up at the right height, to be having a desk or a computer where we don't have to strain our back, strain our eyes. So physical wellness right now and ergonomics is something that people need to consider because, again, a lot of money is put into the ergonomics of an office. And a lot of people are now working from home in environments that aren't necessarily set up for that. So these are all factors that need to be looked at because they're impacting your people's well-being. Another one that's been dramatically impacted by COVID is this social wellness. That is our interaction with those around us, our relationship with our peers, and ultimately our relationship with the organization itself. Whereas previously we relied on shared spaces to have this social wellness. We relied on our shared spaces to be able to interact with each other, get to know each other, support one another. That's now lacking. And one of the ways that I've seen a lot of organizations be very successful is build informal social networking into their practices since they've worked remotely, to ensure that people aren't feeling left out and aren't feeling any lack of that connection with others. So those are the top four, and those are the ones that are visible to others and that are observable. Then there's the bottom four, which are less observable, but all internal and all extremely important. So continuing around the circle is intellectual wellness. That is, what are we doing to stimulate our brain and ultimately continue to develop intellectually? This is one area that varies dramatically from individual to individual at work. Some people are reliant entirely on their workplace for their intellectual growth, or they connect it entirely with their role. So, for example, I used to work with many deeply technical people who consider their intellectual wellness as a key aspect of their overall employee experience. If they're not continuing to develop, they consider themselves obsolete within 6 months. Which then ties also to occupational wellness, which is our relationship with our jobs and our roles. So one of the key factors when it comes to occupational wellness is our autonomy. How much are we able to control our own piece and control our own area? From my conversations with a lot of individuals, both at the leadership and the employee level, through COVID, this has been a difficulty because a lot of managers who aren't used to managing remotely are now micromanaging and looking over the shoulder in ways that they hadn't necessarily previously. Next up is spiritual wellness. Spiritual wellness, when it comes to our work relationship, it ultimately comes down to our values and the purpose of the organization. Do we relate to the values as they're behaved by individuals? Through COVID, many leaders have demonstrated what their values truly are. Some of them have demonstrated a value of taking care of their people and protecting them, and some of them have continued to put their people in harm's way until the law told them they shouldn't. What is the connection between the people and the values of the organization, and what is the connection between the people and the purpose of the organization? That is spiritual wellness. And then ultimately, emotional wellness is about our feelings. One of the key contributors to emotional wellness at work is psychological safety. That is, how comfortable do we feel in being our whole self and sharing opinions without fear of retribution, of being mocked, or anything like that. So on the next slide, I'll go through a little bit with how this impacts the individual. So if you look in the middle of the circle, there's our individual who has their 8 dimensions of wellness. Around that is a circle of expectations. Expectations is a fundamental aspect of employee experience that is completely individual from person to person. That's why 2 people can have the exact same experience, and one person could be completely miserable and one person could be inspired. It's about understanding what people's expectations are, managing those expectations, and ensuring they're aligned with organizational needs. Then outside of the individual are all of the employee experience factors, the EX factors as I call them, that are impacting the individual. So now I'm going to turn it over to David, who's going to take us through a little bit about what are the different roles in accomplishing this? How can each of the different groups within the organization be responsible to achieve these outcomes for their people?
Thank you, Gil, for that overview and introduction. So let's start to make this very practical so you can apply this, well, it's evening your time, morning our time, apply this tomorrow at work. We want to make this as practical as possible. So I want to put this in perspective of what I consider the 4 buckets of responsibility. The first bucket is going to be the individual employee. The second is going to be their manager. The third is the C-suite or executive team. And the fourth is the HR community. And when we talk about the concepts that Gil is talking about, it's really important to use those 8 buckets, as he calls them, sort of as guidelines for the kinds of questions that people have to ask each other to uncover that psychological safety. Because if we can't establish psychological safety, people aren't coming back. And I can tell you right now, in reading some of the literature and listening to some of my colleagues, there's quite a few very large, well-known consulting firms who are actually encouraging people, leaders, to go after top talent that's currently employed, because the assumption is that during this isolation period, they have not had a good employee experience. So instead of, as one of them put it in a recent article, instead of keeping your C players and hoping for the best, this is an opportunity to go after other people's A players. So if you're not really paying attention to this employee experience, you might find that some of your best employees are not there when they return, when you return to work in a week, or begin to return to work starting tomorrow in phase 1. So it's very important, and that ties back into your top concern, is how are we dealing with our employees in isolation? So the first issue in dealing with our employees is going to be the supervisor. A lot of organizations are having these Zooms or Teams meetings with their manager and the team to ensure that the business is happening, that there's business continuity, products, research, etc. is getting done. That individual manager needs to have one-on-one conversations as well with their team, because people are paying careful attention to the words that people use at this time. People are paying very careful attention to what is being said, and because of all those factors Gil has explained under wellness, are beginning to interpret them according to their own needs. One of the things I didn't think about, because it's just myself and my wife in isolation here, is when kids are going to school, and if they have schoolwork, they need an way of accessing it. If both the husband and wife are at home and they have schoolwork, they both need computers. So if you have 3 children and a husband and wife at home, you need 5 computers in order to get everything done, which definitely is not the norm. So for instance, the school systems in Ontario gave out smart books gave out Chromebooks to students that didn't have access. But the fact is that there's a lot of things going on at home. So the question, in my opinion, that the manager has to ask there's 2 questions the manager has to ask a direct report. And the manager has to be probably trained on this, because they usually have answers, they don't have questions, which is a key issue. Here, it's about the questions, not the answers. The first question is, how are you doing? What's going on in your life? The second question is there anything I can do to help? And that is beyond work, because they're going to forget about work. And if there's a crisis or something happening at home and they need support, and you ask the question and then don't follow up, you're better off not having asked the question. Now, this second role, or the HR community and the HR, and in particular, the traditional HR business partners. Usually the HR business partners don't have direct interaction on a regular basis with the individual contributors. The business partners are usually associated with the more senior people in the group, worried about strategy, recruitment, performance management, etc. The HR business partner has to find out from not only the manager on what the manager has discovered in talking one-on-one with his employees or her employees. The business partner also has to ask individual contributors the same 2 questions. And this came to me because of work I was doing recently, in a conversation I had recently with a firm out in San Francisco, well-known organization, which I can't name, that deals with our emails. And one of the HR leaders said they're finding out that the team leaders are having their meetings, are not talking one-on-one to their staff. The staff has to have an outlet to speak about, but they're not doing it. And when they are doing it, what she found out was a lot of those managers are asking the questions, finding out what is happening in this person's wider community at home, and they're not following up. Because if you ask somebody or let somebody know, even without asking for help, but you let somebody know, you've got to follow up and give them that support. So there's the individual contributor who is working at home, working remotely. They have needs which are business related, not business related, but as Gil said, everything that happens in their circle of influence will have an impact on how they make decisions, how they interact at work. You have the managers who sometimes are running their meetings, expecting things, micromanaging, even more so than they do at work, because they don't have that contact, and it is aggravating a lot of direct reports. And you have to have the HR team divide up those people so they can get, in a large organization, it has to be obviously a smattering of people, but in a smaller organization, talking to everybody. Because the more you talk to people, the more you follow up and do something for them without them directly asking for it, the more likely there's going to be that psychological connection, and they are going to return to work safely. And then you have the senior leader role. In the senior leader role, a lot of organizations have done things which are fascinating. And in the senior leader role, They have had town hall meetings for the entire organization. They've had meetings on a constant basis with their direct report team. They've done a lot of very good public relations, communications work. But then there's those senior leaders that are actually showing up at some of these team meetings of the groups that are 2-3 levels below them, just to say hi and just to ask, is there anything they can do to help? Because that is going to be a really important part, which I'm going to talk about in my closing, on how are you going to make sure that your organization does things differently today or in the future than it did before this crisis started. Because one of the things that leaders do that are being successful here is they're finding opportunity to come out of this situation differently than they went into it. So making sure that each of your people have those roles, and if you are not comfortable with your managers asking those questions and following up, one of the best things that I've found when we work with leaders and understanding this is the most important thing is asking questions, not having answers. Is asking questions and counting to 30 and not saying a word. Because when there's silence of that nature, people have a human nature to fill that in. And when they fill it in and begin talking, you begin developing that relationship. It's not, and it's listening and hearing them and picking up on triggers that you can follow up and do something about it. It's that empathy that leaders, managers, frontline supervisors have to have during this time in order to understand how people are reacting and building relationships in order to build a stronger foundation for the employee experience. Gil now is going to talk to you about a tool, give you an overview of a tool that you can use to immediately sort of bring this to life and make this happen for your employees. So Gil, it's yours.
Thanks, David. So what I want to take us through now is a tool called a journey map. Journey mapping is one of my favorite tools that can be implemented immediately by people to help understand exactly what a user is experiencing. So for our example here, the user we're talking about is the employee. So on the slide that I'm going to be bringing up in a moment, I'll show you an example of this is a high level of what a journey map looks like. The reality is that a journey map is built on whatever you determine it should be based on. So the first thing you should be doing prior to putting together the journey map is putting together a team. You should be gathering a group of employees, I would say about 6 to 8 employees, a diverse group of people, diverse group of thoughts, ideas, perspectives, and from around the organization to help improve the employee experience. Give them the mandate to work toward improving the employee experience. And because a journey map can be used in any range of scenarios, start with talking to the employees about what journey they believe is most important to be addressed right now. So the first thing you're doing is building ownership of the system for your employees. You're working with them that they are the ones that are determining this is the journey that we should be discussing. So some example journeys that could be discussed right now could be the candidate experience. If you're still hiring, it's important to understand what the candidate experience looks like from the candidate's perspective. Historically, we've created talent acquisition or hiring processes built on what is the organization trying to accomplish. However, a lot of smarter organizations have built better candidate experiences by including that perspective into the process. So for example, if you were making a journey around the candidate experience, you would want to include people who had recently been through it. Because the reality is, when it comes to journey mapping, is your ideas are just your ideas. And you need to ensure that you include your user either in person or over time through research to make sure that the decisions you make are user-centric. So I'll take you a little bit through the journey map. So looking at the top line, you can choose what your steps are. For the example I've given, there are 10 steps, but it could be 4 steps, it could be 5 steps. It depends on how deep you want to go into each of the steps. So you decide what is the beginning and what is the end of the journey. But it's really, really important to remember that you're not looking at the journey just from the organization's perspective. So again, using the candidate example, the journey doesn't begin when the requisition is filed, or the journey doesn't begin when the organization decides it needs to fill a role. The journey begins when the person determines that they need to look for another job. That is where their journey begins. And it's important to differentiate that you're going by their journey, not yours. So once you've filled out all the steps in the process of whatever it is, the journey that you've created, each person individually then starts to fill out the chart. In ideal circumstances, we would all be in the same place and we would all have nice Sharpies and Post-it notes and a big whiteboard on which to do this. In reality, not every organization is going to be able to do that right now. And there are a lot of great tools online, such as Miro, that can help people work collaboratively in building a journey map. So the first step is divergent thinking. There are no bad ideas at this point. This is not a time to criticize or question other people's ideas. Everybody should start filling out each of the parts of the journey from their own experience, from their own perspective, and from their own research based on the user's perspective. Now, if you go down the side, there are 4 different categories in which you should be filling out information. What is the individual feeling at the time? What is the person expecting at the time? What are they thinking and what are they doing? In the end, the journey map isn't about having a chart that's filled out. Once you fill it out, you don't put it up on a wall because ideally it should be changing. Through the journey map, you should be finding friction points and other touch points that could use improvement or could be highlighted. So what I'll show you on the next slide is just a sample of what this looks like when it's completed. So this was an example journey map that I put together with a friend of mine around a candidate experience process. So step 1 was starting with the person realizing they needed to leave the role, and step 10 was the person walking in on day 1. When working with my team, we determined that there were different highs and lows throughout the experience that provided insights in how we needed to make decisions differently. Ultimately, that is the power of the journey map, is it allows you to make better decisions because you're making user-centric decisions over a course of a period of time. And so I'll say for me, making a journey map is a really exciting experience because when you get a variety of different opinions all coming together for the same purpose, sharing concepts without defeating each other, but all working toward the common goal, you get a lot of energy and a lot of excitement toward the changes that need to happen, because ultimately a journey map from 1 month to the next shouldn't look the same because you're continually iterating, continually approving, and continually trying to change the friction points so that those little red circles across the emotion line start to improve, and so that the journey would be more consistent and more stable, allowing for more positive feelings and positive perspectives. I'm now going to toss it back over to David to sum up a lot of what we've been talking about, as well as share some of the lessons that we can learn from how CEOs have been responding to the COVID crisis. Over to you, David.
Thank you, Gil. One of the things which I want to begin with is a sort of a summary of what Gil said on this journey map, and taking it from the perspective of the employee. So the employee, because if you and the employee have 2 different perspectives and you never address their perspective, you're going to alienate them. And one of the things that is really important that I think is worthwhile repeating is there are no problems we can't solve together, and very few problems we can solve by ourselves. And so this problem, this whole experience that we're going through right now, if we make this a communal effort, we will solve the problems and you'll be able to move forward successfully. If you try to have your senior management team impose the answers on others, if you have your senior management team making all the decisions without the employee input, then those problems are not going to solve because they haven't done that. And the other piece, which relates back to what I was talking about earlier, and also the different ways different organizations' leadership has responded to this, is that our behaviors don't make you a better, our intents, sorry, I got that wrong. Our intents doesn't make you a better person. A lot of leaders have great intents, but their action and their intent do not align. And people are not looking at what you say, they're looking very carefully at what you do. So this is a really important opportunity for leaders to say, if these have always been the values of our organization, and even if we haven't lived them so well, now more than ever, will it be time for them to have to look towards making this happen. Now more than ever must they live those values, because the way they behave now will be a message to everybody else. So let me just put it to you as leaders, and talking with leaders and reading a lot of what's going on and listening to colleagues of mine in different exchanges we've had, I find that leaders and organizations are as a result approaching this differently. The first is what I call the ostrich approach. And it's the woe is me, what is happening to us? What is happening to me? They're very much focused on financially what's happening, that this is happening to them, and they're very much paralyzed. The second group of leaders, however, are more focused on those things that are happening in the world, but they're not moving forward. They're not looking at what can we do differently. The third group is doing something very interesting. The third group of leaders are taking a look at what is happening outside their community, what's happening in their community, and what are the things that we've always done? What are the standard operating procedures we've always done that now have to change? And instead of imposing change, they're looking to their employees to find out what is it that we need to do differently and learn from this experience so we come out of it differently. What are the things that we've always done in the past that we have to give up, that I've fought as a leader perhaps doing, but we have to give up? And, you know, it's, as I said in the beginning of this section, you know, we don't get judged by our intents, we get judged by our actions. And if our actions are inclusive, our actions are helping other people be successful, that's going to have a long-term impact on us. So just to summarize it into 8 sort of concluding points, we have to build, as Gil and I have been saying all along, an inclusive, psychological, safe place to work, whether that safe place to work is from their house remotely or inside the organization. We have to be open to do things differently than we've done them before, which will have a long-lasting impact on our agility to change. We have to have a mindset which is focused on resilience. We have to have an external focus, but we have to focus on our people to ensure that they focus on externally the way that they're feeling positive. We have to have regular and dynamic and heartfelt, radical conversations about people's performance, which most people shy away from. We have to tap into the whole social movement and use this whole ability to connect in different ways, productively in a meaningful way. And we have to focus and thrive on our ability to live our values. one of the other points is that a lot of organizations have learned is corporate social responsibility is really important at this time, but the most effective is in your local community. The most effective corporate social responsibility is not on a national level. It's on a level in the communities in which your employees live. Because those people, they're going to see outside of work when this whole thing returns to the new normal. And they have to have an interaction. And that's also a good message to create an employee brand, how people perceive you, is by being involved in the social issues that are currently focusing on local. With that is our thoughts on this. We are welcoming any questions. We want to thank the organizations for arranging this, and it is my sincere hope that in the near future, when things are in the new normal, that you will be having your annual conference, and I'll be able to come and enjoy, as long as it's not 45 degrees, because heat and I do not get along very well. I live in Canada for a good reason. So
David,
hopefully in January, February, it'll be a lot cooler.
David, we've had a question come in. And it's a great question, and I'd like to hear your thoughts first, and I'll add my thoughts after. Is what happens when we don't ask questions? How do we step in afterwards if no empathy was shown from the beginning?
Well, you're kind of lost. if you haven't shown any empathy, especially senior leadership hasn't shown any caring, any empathy, any ability to reach out to people and ask very simple, focused questions, I'm pretty sure that your employees are probably either on Indeed or LinkedIn looking for new jobs, because this is a great opportunity to do that. So one of the things that HR can do, and this is where HR, I believe, has to stop being the person who answers the phone and says yes all the time. I think HR, in order to capture a leadership position and capture the attention of leaders, is you have to have the courage to tell the emperor that he or she has no clothes. You have to have the courage to say to leadership, you know, here are the questions, I've written them out for you. Memorize them, don't read them, and start asking people. Have your direct reports ask people, and then you follow up on either an appointed time or serendipitously, you follow up with each one of your direct reports individually and ask them, so what did you learn from asking these questions? That's the first question. And then leaders have to ask the second question, what have you done about it? Because that will trickle down, because I believe that things flow from the top. So if you are going to ask questions, if you are going to ask it, then your direct reports are going to ask. But you've also got to have enough confidence to follow up and say, so what did you learn by asking those questions? Deal?
Yeah, I would say you're definitely at a setback by doing that. But the first thing that HR needs to do is to convey the impact to leaders on that type of decision. That is what's most important, helping leaders understand the cost of turnover and the cost of demotivation when that happens. Because what happens when you don't ask questions? Well, it still happens. Life is still happening. Struggles are still happening. And what's happening is that you're not collecting the feedback you need. The analogy I always use when it comes to not asking questions or looking for employee feedback is that a great cook or a great chef tastes their food as they're making it. They don't just make a dish and leave it to cook and they just expect everything to come out the way they want to. You need to be able to collect feedback. So if you are in the position that leaders are not asking questions, the first step is ensuring they understand why that matters to them. If they don't get the WIFM, if they don't understand what is in it for them and in it for the organization to ask those questions, they're never going to change. If you are successful in conveying that to them, in conveying the importance to them, then the next step is they have to admit it. They have to publicly be vulnerable and admit, I have not asked these questions in the past. However, I'm going to start to now, because I mentioned earlier in the conversation around psychological safety. If the questions have never been asked, I can pretty much guarantee you don't have psychological safety among the team the first time the question gets asked. And if it's never been asked and the team knows that, there's an elephant in the room. And if you don't acknowledge the elephant in the room, it's still throwing its weight around. It's still going to have an impact on the team. It's still going to have an impact on trust, and it's going to have an impact on communication. Because ultimately, trust will define the level of communication you get from your team. If you ask questions of a team that has zero trust of you, they're not going to give you honest answers if they give you answers at all. If you have a team that has 100% trust in you, you'll be able to ask them questions and get answers that they know you don't want to hear, but you need to hear. And that is one of the downsides of not asking questions and not creating psychological safety, is there's information that exists within your organization that will change the way people make decisions. And if you don't ask the employees, you won't find out the answer to that question.
Now, Maria, I think, was collecting questions. Does she have any other questions for us?
One just came up. Thank you for answering the first one. The second one, what is the relation between organization culture and employee experience?
Okay, that's a great question. So culture is one aspect of employee experience. There are many different ways, different models that people break down employee experience, but one of the most popular ones is that there are three main aspects. There is the physical, there is the technological, and then there is the culture. So culture is a key ingredient in employee experience. The problem is, in too many organizations, it's misunderstood, or it's the only ingredient that people actually look at. So culture also, unfortunately, over time has grown many different definitions and different beliefs, and people apply whatever it is they want to when they call things culture. And one of the most important aspects is culture is about how people interact when they're working. How do managers lead and manage their teams? How do people support each other? How are decisions made? These are the true aspects of culture, not parties, not social events, not free food, foosball tables. And so understanding that how work is actually done is a key ingredient to the experience. Does my manager provide me honest feedback? How often do they provide me honest feedback? How clear am I on the connection between my own work and the work the organization does? These are all key inputs into culture, and culture is a key input into employee experience. But there are a lot of specifically definable aspects of culture that matter, that go into employee experience. But really, it comes down to the organization and what that group of people cares about.
Yeah, one other thing, though, I'd like to add is that one of my pet peeves is that organizations say culture is found based on behavior. Behaviors are generated, or the source of those usually come from our values. The problem is that a lot of organizations will articulate their values and then never live them. So I always say that there's two types of cultures in an organization. There's the overt culture, which is visibly written on the wall on the website, and the covert culture. People make decisions based on the covert culture, what people actually do, not what they actually say. And when the two are in conflict, you usually have very cynical employees. So I think it's a very good question, but culture is one of the roots of one of the foundation pieces of building the employee experience, because if you treat your employees according to your behaviors and they've joined the organization because of those, keeping that in place will in fact strengthen the relationship. Another question.
Stefanos, I think you're on mute.
Oh, I'm so sorry. This is the last question. How can you persuade management to be flexible with employees when before COVID they were not in favor of this?
Well, that gets back to that agility thing I concluded with. We all have to, the person who comes out of this, who doesn't learn from this, will be in a very bad situation. So what can we learn from this experience? Again, it goes to asking questions of your senior leader. You know, what can we learn from this? They've all had this experience. They've gone through it as well. And if they are focused only on their bottom line and not the people that produce the bottom line, if they're only focused on those things which are, you might say, in the COVID environment hierarchy of needs, plagiarizing, you know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and they're not worried about, you know, that security issue, that health issue, et cetera, I feel that you're going to have a very difficult situation. One way of doing it, however, is to remind them of the cost of replacing employees. Our research that I've done for 30 years on this topic, to replace an untrained entry-level person in an organization is 1.5 times annual salary. To replace a good technician at a frontline position is 3 times salary. A middle manager is 4 to 6 times salary, and a senior person can be as much as 7 to 8 times salary. So if you're going to lose 10 people as managers because you're not going to pay attention to them, you're more in that category number 1 that I mentioned on how people have reacted to it, and you're not learning from it, it's going to cost you a lot of reputation in the marketplace. It's going to cost the employer brand and the employee brand a lot of damage. And so the question is, are you willing to do that? Are you willing to give up what we built up over the years because you haven't adjusted to the new reality? They're not going to like hearing it, but I think they'll thank you. The person, I mean, I've been doing this, and that's one of the reasons that I'm probably called a contrarian consultant. I always ask the questions that need to be asked, not the questions people expect to be asked. You need to be able to have the courage to do the right thing as an HR person. So I think you got to ask, don't go into them and accuse them of anything. Go into this process by asking them questions, and again, use that process of counting very slowly out 30 seconds after you ask that question, waiting for an answer. Because people, Carl Rogers in Rogerian psychology, you know, pointed out that people need to fill the silence void. Humans have the need to talk. Give them that opportunity, force them to talk by being silent. That'd be my response.
I would also add to what David's saying, because David is pushing toward a point, but something I often, when talking to HR leaders, one point that I often say when you're trying to work with leadership, think like a salesperson. And even get advice from your salespeople, because salespeople have amazing skills at understanding a person's needs and helping them understand their own pain points, their own needs from their own perspective. They know how to ask the questions. They know where to put in those pauses. They know how to bring it out of a person so that they understand what it is, the value to them. So often when I talk to HR people, a huge piece of advice I give them when working with senior leaders is think like a salesperson. How can you sell your idea to somebody it would benefit to? Because that's the thing, the organization and the leader would benefit if they listen to your ideas. So what HR has struggled with over many years is how to convey those ideas to leadership. And one of the ways I've seen amazing HR people be very successful is get training from their salespeople on how to do that, on how to hold those conversations and ask those questions that at the end, the other person sees where you're coming from.
And one last point on that is, and it goes to the fact that HR people have to have no ego, is that when they finally come around and do it, give them full credit for coming up with the idea. Even though you generated it, you caused them to do that, give them the full visibility for being the person who's shown the agility and made the change. They'll know you did it, and that's all that needs to happen. Next question.
Perfect. We got another one. This is the final question, and then we can move on to the poll. How would you define the difference between the definitions of employee experience and employee engagement?
Okay.
Gil, you want to take it?
That's another great question. So employee experience is what people are actually experiencing at work. What is happening with the person at work? What are all of their different touch points with the organization, whether it be the technology we use, whether it be the office we attend, it's our manager, our peers, leadership, all of these aspects go into our experience. Our engagement is our internal motivation level in our relationship to the organization as a result of that experience. So engagement is a goal, but the way you do it is by creating the right employee experience. So employee experience is the input, engagement is the output.
And if anybody wants to have a copy of the white paper that we wrote on the importance of building engagement and experience to achieve engagement, just email us, email myself, and I'll gladly send you a copy of the white paper on employee experience and employee engagement.
Perfect. I don't know if you can see the results of the poll.
I haven't been able to read it. It's too small.
I have them on hard copy. I can read them for you if you want. The first question: in the next 2 months, do you expect the number of employees at your company to increase, decrease, or stay approximately the same? 57% said that it will stay approximately the same. Number 2, on a scale from 1 to 4, how would your leadership rate their response to COVID-19? 57% said 3 out of 4. Question 3, on a scale from 1 to 4, how would your frontline employees rate leadership on their response to COVID-19? 61% answered number 3. Question number 4, on a scale from 1 to 4, how would you rate leadership on their response to COVID-19? 57% answered number 3. And question number 5, since COVID-19 started, would you say quality of leadership in your organization has improved, gotten worse, or stayed approximately the same? 62% answered stayed approximately the same.
Yeah, I would say for the last one, the important one for those who said that it's gotten worse, what percentage says it got worse? 4%. 4%. That's probably 1 or 2 people. But then that also means that 34% have said it's improved. I would also say that where it's improved, find opportunity to point that out to your leaders and reinforce it, because the only way to reinforce it so you sustain it beyond this during the new normal is to give positive feedback, positive reinforcement. And for the 64% where it stayed the same, but there was opportunity for improvement, again, ask questions. What if? What if you approached it this way? What if you asked these questions? And I think, there's Eisenhower would always say to his soldiers before they went into battle, he'd say to their leaders, their commanders, if I put a spring on the table and you're in the back and you want to keep that spring in a straight line, what happens to the string? But if you're the leader from the front pulling it, does it stay in a straight line? So I think it's an opportunity here to pull it forward, to keep it in a straight line, to get everybody engaged. So I think there's a big opportunity for the 62% to ask those tough questions to help improve the quality of leadership. Gil, anything else on the responses?
Nope, nothing to add. I just had a little technical glitch with my computer.
I had one yesterday.
Yeah. No, nothing to add. That was great, David.
Okay, thanks. I think that's it from us. Thank you all very much for the opportunity. I am looking forward to coming and visit you live and in person, and hopefully talking about the employee experience, employee engagement, which was planned. If that's still the relevant topic. If not, we can always adjust that. And we thank you for the opportunity. We hope that Gil and I have provided you with information that is both informative, challenging, and practical to implement.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for making this a fruitful afternoon. They say that knowledge is power, and it now remains in our hands and actions to utilize it. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of OF and CYHRMA, thank you for attending this meeting in celebration of the International HR Day. Good afternoon.